Grandma. George's mother went to the door, stopped there, came back and touched George's hair. I don't want you to worry, she said. You will be all right, and Grandma too. Sure, I will be okay. George smiled. George, are you sure? Are you sure about what? Are you sure that you are not scared to be alone with Grandma? Was that what she was going to ask? If it was, the answer is no. After all, he wasn't 6 anymore. When they had first come here to take care of Grandma, and he had cried with terror whenever Grandma had wanted to hold him. She held his brother Buddy, and Buddy was alive. But Buddy was 2 years older. Now Buddy had broken his leg and was at the hospital in Lewiston. I will be fine. Tell Buddy to stay cool. You have got the doctor's number. If something goes wrong, right, he said. He smiled. Did the smile look okay? Sure it did. He wasn't scared of Grandma anymore. Mom was going to the hospital to see Buddy, and he was just going to stay here and be cool. No problem. Mom went to the door again. If she walks up and asks for her tea. I know, George said. He saw how scared and worried she was. She was worried about Buddy. I know all that. Mom, go. You are a good boy, George. Don't be scared. You are not scared of Grandma anymore, are you? No, George said. He smiled. Tell Buddy that I'm sorry, that he broke his leg. I will, she said. She smiled too, but her smile was sad. A woman of about 50 with 2 sons, one 13, one 11, and no man. And remember Dr. Erlander. Sure, he said. You'd better go now. She will probably sleep the whole time. Mom said, I love you, George. You are a good son. She closed the door behind her. George went to the window and watched her get into their old car. Now she looked so sick, so worried. George felt bad for her. If Mom wasn't so worried and scared, George would have been almost happy. He didn't feel bad for Buddy, who liked to tease him. Broken leg weren't a big problem. On the contrary, George was looking forward to some temporary peace and quiet around the house. But now he was alone in the house with Grandma. George walked across the small kitchen. There was a phone on the wall, and next to it was a board with Dr. Erlander's phone number, 681-4330. Mom hadn't written the number there just today, because she had to go to Buddy. It had been there almost 3 weeks now, because Grandma was having her bad spells again. George picked up the phone and listened. He just wanted to check if the phone was working. It was. Grandma was noisy when she had her bad spells, but mostly she just lay in the bed. She had been in for 3 years, a fat old woman in diapers under her nightgown. Her face was wrinkled, and her eyes were empty and blind. At first, Grandma hadn't been blind, but now she had gone totally blind, and she needed 2 people to help her go to the bathroom. In those days, 5 years ago, Grandma had weighed over 200 pounds. Once she wanted a hug, and Buddy, then it, had hugged her. George hadn't. But I'm not scared now, he told himself. walking across the kitchen back to the table. Not a bit. She was just an old lady who has bad spells sometimes. He filled the kettle with water and put it on the stove. He got a teacup and put one of Grandma's special herbal tea bags into it, in case she woke up and wanted a cup. He hoped that she wouldn't, because then he would have to sit next to her and give her the tea, looking at her toothless mouth and listening to the sounds she would make, and her blind eyes would look at you. He ought to go in and check on her, but he didn't want to. I am not afraid of Grandma, he thought. If she wouldn't hug now, I'd go right to her and let her hug me, because she's just an old lady. She's senile, and that's why she has bad spells. That's all. I will let her hug me and not cry, just like Buddy. He walked to the door of Grandma's room and looked in. There lay Grandma, sleeping, her toothless mouth open. She's rising so slowly that you had to look hard to make sure she wasn't dead. Oh God, what if she dies while Mom's at the hospital? She won't. She won't. Yeah, but what if she does? One of Grandma's hands moved slightly. George went back into the kitchen to check the time. Maybe Mom would be back soon. He looked at the clock and was shocked to see that only 20 minutes had passed. Mom wouldn't even get to the city yet. He stood still, listening to the silence. He could hear the refrigerator noise and the clock. He sat down and ate a cookie. He thought of turning on the TV and watching something, but he was afraid. The sound would wake up Grandma, and she would begin calling, Ruth, Ruth, bring me some tea. Tea, Ruth. Once again, George told himself not to be so scared. She was an old lady, lying in bed. She couldn't get up and hurt him. And she was 83 years old. And she wasn't going to die this afternoon. George walked over and picked up the phone again, then put it back. After that, he walked to the sideboard, took out his history book, sat down at the kitchen table, and began to read. But he couldn't concentrate on it. He got up again and went to the door of Grandma's room again. Her hand was still Grandma slept, and her face was gray. To George, she didn't look like a person who was old and ready to die. She didn't look peaceful. She looked crazy and dangerous. George remembered very well how they had come here to take care of Grandma when Grandpa died. Grandpa was some years younger than Grandma, a carpenter, and he had worked right until the day of his death. It had been a heart attack. Even then, Grandma had been getting senile, having her bad spells. She had always been a problem for her family. She was a stern woman who had taught at school for 15 years between having babies and getting in flights with the church. She and Grandma and their 9 children went too. Mom said that Grandpa and Grandma quit the church. At the same time, Grandpa decided to quit teaching. But once, about a year ago, when Aunt Flo came for a visit, George and Buddy heard quite a different story. Grandpa and Grandma had been kicked out of the church, and Grandma had been fired from her job because she did something wrong. It was something about book, why or how someone could be fired from their job and kicked off the charge just because of books. George didn't understand, so he asked Buddy about it. There were different kinds of book. Buddy said, "Yeah, but what kind? How should I know?" "But why did Mom tell us that Grandma quit the charge and her job?" "Because it's a family secret, that's why. Now, leave me alone." George had thought about it for a long time, and finally, about a month after Aunt Flo had left, he went to his mother and asked her. When he asked Mom, she had sat silent for a long time, and then she began talking. "Maybe it's time for you to know now," she had said. "Lying is bad, and we all lie to our children about Grandma, and we lie to ourselves too. I guess most of the time we do." So his mom told him that after Grandpa and Grandma had got married, they had had a baby that was born dead. And a year later, they had another baby that was born dead too. And the doctor told Grandma that she would never have a healthy baby, and that her babies would be born dead or would die as soon as they were born. And that would go on, he said, until it killed her too. Soon the box began. But Mom didn't say what kind of box they were, or where Grandma got them, or how she used them. Grandma got pregnant again, and this time the baby wasn't born dead, and the baby didn't die afterwards. This time the baby was fine, and that was George's Uncle Larson. And after that, Grandma got pregnant and had babies many times. Once Mom said Grandpa had tried to make her get rid of the box, and Grandma wouldn't. George asked his mother why, and she said, "I think that by then the books were as important to her as her babies. All I know for sure is that those books had some power over her." George closed his history book and looked at the clock. It was almost 5. He realized suddenly and with something I like or that if Mom wasn't home by 6 or so, Grandma would wake up and start asking for her supper. George looked out the window. If Buddy hadn't broken his leg, Mom wouldn't be here now, making something for supper, and they would be talking and laughing, and maybe they had play cards later on. He thought about Grandma some years ago, sitting in her chair like a big fat worm in a dress, and him hiding behind his mom, crying, "Send him to me, Ross. I want to hug him. He's a little frightened, Mom. He will come in time." But his mother was frightened too. "Come in, Ross. Send him here. I want to give him a hug." "No, he's crying." Mom had been born in 1930, followed by Aunt Flo in 1932, and then Uncle Frankel in 1934. Uncle Frankel had died in 1948 because of appendicitis. So Grandma had her babies and taught school, and the doctors were totally surprised, and Grandma worked and got more and more well off, even during the Depression, and at last people began to talk. They said that Grandma and Grandpa were too lucky for ordinary people, and it was just after that that the books had been found. Mom wouldn't say more than that, except that the school had found some and that the herdsman had found some more. There had been a big scandal. Grandpa and Grandma had moved to another town. That was the end of it. The children had grown up and had children of their own. When Grandpa had his heart attack, no one wanted to put the old lady in a nursing home. And Grandma didn't want to do a thing like that either. The old lady wanted to go to one of her children and live the rest of her years with the child. But they were all married. None of them wanted to share their home with a senile and unpleasant old woman. All were married except Rose, whose husband died in a car accident. So George's mom was the one to take care of the old lady. George knew that mom had agreed to do it because everyone in the big family had told her that Grandma couldn't possibly live long. She had too many things wrong with her. High blood pressure, obesity, heart problems. It would be 8 months. Aunt Flo and Aunt Stephen and Uncle George all said a year at the most. But now it had been 5 years, and that was long. George suddenly remembered one conversation he had heard years ago. His mom was talking to Uncle George. She's more dangerous now that she's senile, Uncle George said. George, be quiet. The boys can hear us. You know what I mean. You remember what happened to Franklin when he made her angry? George, be quiet. Well, she didn't really mean to do it. George, shut up. He was all prepared. The tea was ready on the stove. If Grandma wanted that, he could make tea. Or he could make dinner. If Grandma woke up and yelled for it. Dr. Islander's number was on the board. In case of an emergency. Everything was cool. So what was he worried about? George had never been left alone with Grandma. That was what he was worried about. Neither he nor Buddy had ever been alone with Grandma until today. She's more dangerous now. You know what I mean? We all lie to our children about Grandma. Suddenly from the other room, where Grandma lay all her days and nights, came a terrible choking sound. George Frost's Grandma had never made a noise like that before. It came again, a shocking sound. Then it stopped. George slowly walked toward the doorway to Grandma's room. I looked inside. Grandma's still sleeping in, and it's all right. That was his first thought. It had only been some weird sound. After all, maybe she made it all the time. When he and Buddy were in school. Just a snore. Grandma was fine sleeping. Then he noticed that her hand with her long nails was now hanging lifelessly over the side of the bed. And he thought his mouth was open. Carefully, George walked closer. He stood by her side for a long time, looking down at her, not daring to touch her, and couldn't understand if she was still breathing or not. Grandma, he whispered. Grandma, you wanted your tea now, Grandma. Nothing. The eyes were closed. The mouth was open. The hand hung. George also remembered one of the bad spells. When Grandma began to shout, as if in a foreign language, Jaijen, Jaijen, Hastard Grayon, uses us. Mom had sent him and Buddy outside, where they had been standing, wondering what was happening. Later, Mom had called them in for supper, as if nothing had happened. George hadn't thought of that bad spells from that day to this, but now, looking at Grandma, who was sleeping so strangely in her bed, he remembered with horror that it was the next day they had learned that Mrs. Harum, who sometimes visited Grandma, had died in her sleep that night. It was Grandma and her books, Grandma who had been kicked out of town, Grandma who hadn't been able to have babies and then had been able to, Grandma who had been kicked out of the church. Grandma had been a witch, and now she was dead. That terrible sound. George thought with horror that snoring sound had been here. Grandma, he whispered. No response. He held his hand in front of Grandma's mouth, but could feel nothing. No air. He decided to call Dr. Arlander, and then stopped. What if he called the doctor, and she really wasn't dead at all? He should take her pulse. He stood looking at that hanging hand. He didn't really want to touch Grandma, even if she was dead, especially if she was dead. What about a mirror? When you pressed on a mirror, it got cloudy. He had seen a doctor do that once in a movie. George ran to the bathroom and got Grandma's little mirror. He took it back to Grandma's bed and held it until it was almost touching Grandma's open mouth. He held it there while he counted to 60, watching Grandma the whole time. Nothing changed. He was sure she was dead even before. He took the mirror away from her mouth and saw that its surface was perfectly clear. Grandma was dead. George realized with relief and some surprise that he could feel sorry for her now. Maybe she had been a witch. Maybe not. Maybe she had only thought she was a witch. However it had been, she was gone now. He returned the mirror to the bathroom, then walked back through her room, looking at the body on his way. He went through the doorway and straight to the telephone. I was all by myself in the house when Grandma died, and I did everything right, he thought proudly. He should call Dr. Arlander first of all. Call him and say, "My grandma just died. Can you tell me what I should do?" Or, "I think my grandma just died." Or even, "I'm quite sure my grandma just died." That was best of all. The doctor would come and say to George, "You did very well in this situation. I want to congratulate you." And George would say something modest. George looked at Dr. Arlander's number and picked up the phone. His heart was beating fast. Grandma had died. The worst had happened, and so how it wasn't as bad as waiting for her to start yelling for Mom to bring her tea. No more tea for Grandma, not ever. But the phone was dead. He listened to the blankness. No voices, no tune. He pushed some buttons. Nothing, just dead blankness. Like the dead blankness in the bed in there. I am alone in this house, with her dead body. He crossed the kitchen slowly, and then turned on the light. It was getting dark in the house. The wind outside was blowing hard. Soon the sun would be gone. Night would be here. Wait, that's all he had to do. Just wait until Mom gets back. He went back to the door of Grandma's bedroom, just to make sure again. There she lay, one hand out of bed, her mouth still open. Grandma was part of the furniture now. You could put her hand back in bed, or pull her hair, or pour water into her mouth, and it would be all the same to her. George glanced at Grandma one more time, and then went back and tried the phone again. Still did. He sat down, trying to think. An hour later it was full dark. The phone was still out. George sat at the kitchen table, jumping at every sound. His history book open in front of him. She will be home soon. She will be home, and then everything will be okay. Everything will be alright. George suddenly froze. You were supposed to cover the dead person's face, like in the movies, but he didn't. So he didn't done everything right then. George stood up. Grandma was totally dead, and he was going to go in there and pull the cover over her face, and then it would be perfect. He went in cautiously. Grandma's room was dark. Her body was like a hung hump in the bed. George turned the yellow light on. Grandma lay there, hanging, mouth open. George felt that he couldn't pick up that hand and put it back in bed with the rest of Grandma. He decided not now. Her hand could stay where it was now. That was too much. He couldn't touch her. Slowly George walked up to Grandma. He stood over her, looking down. Grandma was yellow. Part of it was the light, but not all. George quickly grabbed the cover and pulled it over Grandma's face. Some of the fear went out of George. Now he looked at the hanging hand and decided that he could touch it. He took the cool hand and lifted in. Her hand moved in his and grabbed his wrist. George screamed. He jumped backwards, screaming in the empty house, and her hand relaxed and let go. I'm alright. It was nothing but a reflex. George tried to find some rational thought, but his panic didn't let him. He looked at the hand. The hand hung as it had before. He had imagined the whole thing. He had come into the room, and all the rest of it had been his imagination. But the pain in his wrist soon cleared his head. Dead people didn't grab you. Dead were dead. Unless you are a witch. Unless you choose your time to die. When no one's around but one little kid. Because it's best that way. You can. Can what? Nothing. It was stupid. He had imagined the whole thing. Because he had been scared, and that was all. He wasn't going to come near her again. That was all. The panic was gone. But he was still scared. Almost crying. Only wanted his mother to come home and save him from this hell. George was back in the kitchen, sitting at the table, when Grandma's voice spoke from the other room. Come here, boy. She called in a dead voice. Come in here. Grandma wants to hug you. George tried to scream, but no sound came out. No sound at all. But there were sounds in the other room. Sounds that he heard when Mom was in there, helping Grandma, lifting and turning her. Only now, it sounded as if Grandma was trying to get out of bed. Boy, come in here, boy, right now. There he saw that his feet were obeying that command. He tried to tell them to stop, but they wouldn't. She's a witch, and she's having one of her bad spells. George stepped across the kitchen and through the doorway and into Grandma's room, and yes, she hadn't just tried to get out of bed. She was out. She was sitting in her chair, where she hadn't sat for 4 years since she got too heavy to walk and too senile to know where she was. But Grandma didn't look senile now. Now Grandma's face shone with intelligence, but her eyes were dull and her chest was not moving. Grandma held her hug arms out to him. I want to hug you, Georgie. The dead voice said, don't be a scared crybaby. Let your grandma hug you. George tried to go back, but his body began to walk toward her anyway. He couldn't help it. Okay, he would show Buddy that he wasn't scared of Grandma either. He would go to Grandma and be hugged, because he wasn't a crybaby. He would go to Grandma now. He was almost there when the window suddenly opened and a tree branch knocked by the wind was in the room with them. The wind flooded the room, and somehow now George could scream. He begged, but Grandma made the hissing sound. So George fell down and couldn't get up. Grandma began to raise from her chair and move toward him. George started crawling backwards, crying. Grandma moved on. Grandma moved on. Slowly but steadily did Agneta leave, and then George understood what the hug would mean. The puzzle was complete in his mind, and he managed to jump to his feet, just as Grandma's hand grabbed his shirt. The chair dropped, and George ran into the kitchen. He looked back over his shoulder and saw Grandma's shadow rising on the wall. As she came through the doorway, he would run outside into the night, because when his mother came back, she would find Grandma dead and George alive. Oh yes, but George would have been a different person, would like drinking herbal tea. And at that moment the telephone rang. George picked it up without thinking and screamed into it. Screamed for someone to come, to please help me. He screamed these things silently. Not a sound came out of his mouth. Grandma came into the kitchen grinning. Ruth. It was Aunt Flo's voice from more than 2,000 miles away. Ruth, are you there? Help me. George screamed into the phone again, and what came out was just a whistle. Grandma was holding her arms out for him again. Grandma wanted her hug. She had been waiting for that hug for 5 years. Ruth, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Grandma. George whispered into the telephone. George. Aunt Flo's voice suddenly rose. George, is that you? He began to back away from Grandma and suddenly realized that he had stupidly backed away from the doorway and into the corner of the kitchen. And his paralysis broke, and he screamed into the phone, screamed it over and over again. Grandma, Grandma, Grandma. Grandma's cold hand touched his throat. Her dull, ancient eyes looked into his eyes. Faintly, he heard Aunt Flo say, tell her to lie down. George, tell her to lie down and be still. Tell her she must do it in your name and the name of her father Hester. His name has power over her. George, tell her lie down in the name of Hester. The old wrinkled hand took the telephone from George's hand, and the cord broke. George fell screaming, lie down, be still, in Hester's name. Hester, lie down, be still. Her hand closed around his neck. When his mother finally returned home, an hour later, George was sitting at the table in front of the history book. Such a wind, she said. Was everything all? George, what happened? His mom's face turned a purple white. Grandma, he said. Grandma died. Grandma died, Mommy. And he began to cry. She held him in her arms. Did everything happen? She asked. George, did anything else happen? The wind knocked the tree branches through her window, George said. She looked at his shocked face for a moment and then went into Grandma's room. She was in there for several minutes. When she came back, she was holding a piece of red cloth. It was a bit of George's shirt. I took this out of her hand, Mom whispered. I don't want to talk about it, George said. Call Aunt Flo if you want. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. She tried to stop him, but didn't. He went up to the room he shared with Buddy and listened to the sounds in the house. She wasn't going to talk to Aunt Flo, not tonight, because the telephone cord had broken. Not tomorrow, because before Mom had come home, George had said some words, some of them Latin, some pre-Rodic, and over 2,000 miles away. Aunt Flo had died from a stroke. It was amazing how those words worked, how everything worked. George lay on his bed. He put his hands behind his head and looked up into the darkness. Slowly, slowly, a grin appeared on his face. From now on, things were going to be different here. Very different. George began to laugh.